It echoed through the quantum communication network spanning 12 star systems, a child's voice torn from innocence and thrust into unimaginable terror. On Earth, in the deepest bunkers of the global defense network, every monitoring station fell silent as the transmission ended. Commander Sarah Chen stood frozen in the command center, her coffee mug suspended halfway to her lips. Around her, 43 of humanity's finest military minds stared at screens that had gone dark, each knowing they had just witnessed something that would haunt them forever. "Replay it," Chen whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of quantum processors. "Ma'am, I don't think," began Lieutenant Torres, his young face pale with shock. "I said replay it." The sound filled the chamber again. A child, no more than 7 years old by vocal analysis. Human. Screaming in terror before the transmission cut to static. But it wasn't just any scream. It was the sound of a soul being broken. Chen set down her coffee with trembling hands. In 30 years of military service, she had heard many sounds of war. This was different. This was personal. "Where did it come from?" she asked, though part of her already knew. "New Haven colony, ma'am. Kepler 442 system." Torres's voice cracked. Population was 12,000. 800 of them children. The silence that followed was deafening. New Haven had been humanity's furthest outpost, a farming colony established just 5 years ago. They had sent their last routine transmission. 18 hours earlier, everything normal, harvest season going well, children playing in the biodomes. Now there was only silence. "Get me Admiral Morrison," Chen ordered. "Priority Alpha." As her staff scrambled to establish the connection, Chen stared at the tactical display showing humanity's 17 colonies scattered across known space, each one a tiny speck of light in a vast, dark ocean, each one now feeling desperately vulnerable. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the weathered face of Admiral James Morrison, commander of Earth's Deep Space Fleet. His expression told Chen everything she needed to know. He had heard it too. "Sarah," Morrison said, his usual military formality abandoned. "Tell me we have ships in the area." "The nearest patrol is 6 hours out," Chen replied. "But Admiral, the transmission, it came through the emergency beacon system. Whoever did this, they knew our protocols. They wanted us to hear it." Morrison's jaw tightened. "Any idea who?" Chen pulled up the intelligence reports that had been accumulating on her desk for months. Reports that suddenly seemed far more urgent than bureaucratic paper pushing. "We've been tracking increased Zephyrian activity in the outer systems," she said. "Their empire has been expanding rapidly. Aggressive colonization, forced relocations of indigenous species. But they've never directly attacked human settlements before. Maybe they finally decided we were in their way," Morrison growled. The quantum communicator chimed with an incoming priority transmission. Torres looked up from his station, his face somehow even paler than before. "Ma'am, we're receiving a wideband transmission. It's addressed to Earth." On screen, the display shifted to show a figure that made every human in the room instinctively recoil. The Zephyrian stood 7 feet tall, its serpentine body covered in iridescent scales that shifted color with each movement. 4 arms moved in complex gestures while its large, multifaceted eyes regarded the camera with what could only be described as smug satisfaction. When it spoke, its voice was like wind through broken glass. "Greetings, humans of Earth. I am High, Commander Veltar of the Zephyrian Empire. By now you have discovered the fate of your colony on Kepler 442. Consider this a demonstration of our capabilities." Chen felt her hands clench into fists. Around her she could hear the sharp intake of breath from her staff. Veltar continued. "Your species has occupied 12 worlds within our designated expansion zone. You will evacuate these worlds within 7 of your standard days. Any resistance will result in the same fate as befell New Haven. We do not make empty threats." The transmission paused, and for a moment, the Zephyrian seemed to look directly at Chen through the screen. "To demonstrate our resolve, we will execute 1 human colony every day until our demands are met. The choice is yours. We begin with the children." The screen went dark. The command center erupted in controlled chaos as officers began running calculations, updating star charts, and establishing communication links with colony worlds. But Chen stood motionless, her mind racing through possibilities and implications that would reshape humanity's place in the galaxy. 7 days, 12 colonies, nearly 500,000 human lives hanging in the balance. But as she stared at the now dark screen, Chen couldn't shake the feeling that the Zephyrians had made a critical miscalculation. They had studied human expansion, human technology, human diplomatic protocols. But they had never studied human nature when pushed too far. They had never learned what happened when humanity heard its children scream. "Torres," she said quietly, her voice carrying a dangerous edge that made the young lieutenant straighten. "Get me President Martinez, priority 1. And Torres?" "Yes, ma'am." "Tell him it's time to wake the sleeping giant." Chapter 2. The Price. Of underestimation. President Elena Martinez hadn't slept in 36 hours, and it showed. Dark circles ringed her eyes as she stood before the emergency session of the Global Council. Representatives from every nation and colony world gathered in the massive amphitheater beneath Geneva. The weight of 500,000 lives pressed down on her shoulders as she began what would become known as the most important speech in human history. "Members of the Council," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. 18 hours ago, the Zephyrian Empire murdered 12,000 human beings. They did this not in the heat of battle, not in the confusion of first contact, but as a calculated act of terrorism designed to force our compliance. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. On the great screen behind Martinez, images from the few survivors who had escaped New Haven in the final moments played in silent horror. Burning biodomes, bodies in the streets, and everywhere the distinctive scorch marks of Zephyrian plasma weapons. Representative Liu from the Asian Coalition raised his hand. "Madam President, surely there must be room for negotiation. The Zephyrians are clearly technologically superior. Their empire spans hundreds of worlds while we barely control 17. They killed children, Representative Liu." Martinez's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "They broadcast a child's death scream across our communication networks as a warning. There is no negotiating with that level of barbarism." Dr. Amara Okafor, the colony world representative from Kepler 186, stood slowly, as one of the few people in the chamber who had actually lived on a frontier world. Her words carried special weight. "The president is right," Okafor said, her Nigerian accent lending gravity to her words. "I've read the xenopsychology reports on the Zephyrians. They view any species that shows weakness as prey. If we surrender now, they'll simply find new demands. New colonies to evacuate, new children to threaten." "What are you suggesting?" asked Representative Volkov from the European Federation. "That we fight an empire with hundreds of worlds? With technology decades ahead of ours?" Martinez walked to the edge of the speaking platform, her gaze sweeping across the assembled representatives. "I'm suggesting that the Zephyrians have made a fundamental error in judgment," she said. "They've studied our expansion patterns, our technology, our diplomatic protocols, but they've never studied what makes humans human." She pressed a control, and the screen behind her shifted to show a historical montage, images that every human child learned in school. The Spartans at Thermopylae, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the Battle of Britain, Pearl Harbor and its aftermath. Every time in human history that someone has tried to intimidate us through the murder of innocents, they've created something they weren't prepared to face. They've awakened what we call the sleeping giant, the collective fury of a species that refuses to kneel. Representative Chen from the Luna colonies leaned forward. "With respect, Madam President, inspirational speeches won't stop Zephyrian battle fleets. What exactly are you proposing?" Martinez smiled, and for the first time since the crisis began, it wasn't a reassuring expression. "Admiral Morrison, please brief the Council on Project Prometheus." A section of the chamber's floor rose, revealing Admiral Morrison at a tactical display station. The veteran officer looked every bit as exhausted as the president, but his eyes burned with cold determination. "Ladies and gentlemen, Morrison began. For the past 15 years, Earth's Defense Research Division has been developing what we called contingency technologies, weapons and systems that would only be deployed in the event of an existential threat to humanity. The display behind him lit up with technical schematics that made several representatives gasp. The first is our quantum disruption network. We've been quietly installing quantum resonance nodes on every human ship and station built in the last decade. If activated, these nodes can create massive electromagnetic pulses that will disable Zephyrian ships within a 50 light-year radius. Representative Singh from the Indian subcontinent raised her hand. How massive are we talking about? Massive. Enough to turn their technological advantage into a liability, Morrison replied. Zephyrian technology relies heavily on quantum-entangled systems. Our disruption field will cascade through their networks, effectively blinding and crippling their entire fleet structure in our region of space. The chamber buzzed with whispered conversations. Representative Yamamoto from the Pacific Alliance stood. And the second contingency? Morrison's expression grew even more grim. The Human Diaspora Protocol. We've been secretly constructing ships using a new form of propulsion, one the Zephyrians have never encountered. If Earth falls, these ships will carry human civilization to previously unknown regions of space, ensuring our species' survival. How many ships? Asked Dr. Okafor. 300, each capable of carrying 50,000 people in extended hibernation, with full manufacturing capabilities and genetic archives. The numbers hung in the air like a death sentence. 15 million humans, less than half of 1% of Earth's population, would survive if the plan failed. Martinez stepped forward again. The third contingency is why I've called this emergency session. It requires the unanimous consent of the Global Council. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. We've developed what we're calling the Final Protocol, a weapon system that will target every Zephyrian world simultaneously. Not their military installations, not their government centers. Everything. The chamber fell silent. Representative Liu's face had gone pale. You're talking about xenocide. I'm talking about survival, Martinez replied coldly. The Zephyrians have made it clear that they view humanity as a pest to be exterminated. They've given us 7 days to abandon worlds where human children are learning to walk, where human families are building futures. They've chosen to make this an existential conflict. And if we refuse to authorize this weapon? Asked Representative Volkov. Martinez gestured to the screen, which now showed the tactical situation. Red markers indicated Zephyrian fleet positions, dozens of battle groups converging on human space like a closing fist. Then in 6 days, 12 hours, and 14 minutes, they'll begin systematically murdering every human being in our outer colonies. Starting with the children, as they promised. The chamber erupted in debate, voices raised in horror, outrage, and desperate calculation. But through it all, Martinez stood silent, watching the faces of humanity's representatives as they grappled with the unthinkable. Representative Okafor was the first to stand. The frontier worlds have already made their choice, she said simply. We've heard our children scream. There will be no surrender. One by one, other representatives stood. The Luna colonies, the Mars settlements, the asteroid mining consortiums. Within minutes, 2/3 of the chamber was on their feet. Representative Liu remained seated, his head in his hands. How did we come to this? He whispered. We didn't come to this, Martinez replied, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. They brought this to us. They chose to make human children their first target. They chose to underestimate what that would unleash. She pressed another control, and Admiral Morrison's display shifted to show the real-time positions of humanity's research vessels, ships that had been quietly moving into position around Zephyrian space for the past 5 years. The vote is called, Martinez announced. All in favor of authorizing the final protocol if diplomatic resolution proves impossible? The electronic voting began immediately. Green lights appeared on the board as nations and colonies registered their decision. Within 2 minutes, the result was clear. Unanimous approval. Martinez closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of history settling on her shoulders. When she opened them again, her expression was carved from stone. Admiral Morrison, Initiate, Phase 1 of Operation Prometheus, and send a message to High Commander Veltar. What should it say, Madam President? Martinez smiled again, and this time it was terrifying in its absolute certainty. Tell him that humanity has heard his message, and now he's going to hear ours. Chapter 3. When the giant wakes, the Zephyrian High Command had expected many possible responses from the humans. Diplomatic protests, frantic evacuation attempts, perhaps even a desperate military strike against one of their outlying positions. What they hadn't expected was silence. For 48 hours after delivering their ultimatum, the human colonies had gone completely quiet. No emergency transmissions. No evacuation fleets. No desperate diplomatic overtures. It was as if the entire human species had simply disappeared. High Commander Veltar stood in the center of his flagship's command chamber, his forearms manipulating holographic displays that showed the human colonial systems. His scaled hide shifted from confident gold to uncertain blue as he studied the tactical readouts. Status report, he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered 14 species. Sub-Commander Rixtal approached, her younger scales still showing traces of fear purple around the edges. My lord, our deep-range sensors are detecting no significant human fleet movements. Their civilian communication networks remain active, but military channels have gone completely silent. And their evacuation efforts? None detected, my lord. If anything, the colonies appear to be fortifying. Veltar's hide shifted to angry red. The humans were calling his bluff. After witnessing the destruction of New Haven, after hearing their own children die, they were still refusing to submit. It was incomprehensible. Prepare to execute the second demonstration, he ordered. Target the agricultural world of Demeter. Full orbital bombardment. Make sure to capture footage of the civilian casualties for broadcast. My lord, interrupted Navigation Commander Zethar, his voice carrying an unusual tension. We're receiving an incoming transmission. Wideband, directed at our entire fleet, from Earth? No, my lord, from everywhere. The signal is originating from multiple points simultaneously. Veltar's hide rippled with confusion. Impossible. Display it. The command chamber's main hologram shifted to show a human female, middle-aged, by their species standards, with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to look directly through the screen. When she spoke, her voice was calm, almost conversational. High Commander Veltar. My name is President Elena Martinez of the United Earth Alliance. I'm broadcasting this message from multiple locations because I wanted to ensure you received it clearly. Veltar's forehands gestured dismissively. Another human diplomatic gesture. They're going to offer us tribute, perhaps negotiate for additional time. But Martinez wasn't finished. By now, your sensors have detected that our colonies aren't evacuating. I wanted to explain why. You see, you've made a fundamental error in your understanding of human psychology. The image of Martinez was replaced by historical footage, images that made several Zephyrian officers recoil in confusion and disgust. Humans throwing themselves at armored vehicles, humans charging machine gun nests, humans standing in front of tanks. Throughout our history, Martinez continued, we've had a saying, don't poke the bear. It refers to our tendency to respond to existential threats with what other species consider irrational levels of aggression. We don't simply fight back. We commit everything. The historical footage shifted to more recent images. Human colony ships launching into deep space, human mining operations in asteroid fields, human settlements on worlds that should have been uninhabitable. You studied our expansion, our technology, our diplomatic protocols, but you never studied our nature. You never learned that we're the species that looked at a universe trying to kill us and decided to live there anyway. Veltar's hide had shifted to deep purple, a color indicating growing unease. Around him, his command staff was beginning to shift nervously. The transmission continued. 18 hours ago, you made your greatest mistake. You targeted our children, not as collateral damage in a military operation, but as a specific, calculated act of terrorism. You wanted us to hear them die, Martinez reappeared on screen, and now her eyes held something that made even Veltar step back from the display. So we did. Every human being in known space heard that child scream, and now you're going to learn what happens when you wake the sleeping giant. The transmission cut to black for a moment, then returned with Admiral Morrison standing beside Martinez. "Hi, Commander," Morrison said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "At precisely 1400 hours standard time, we activated something we call the Quantum Disruption Network. Every ship in your fleet, every space station, every orbital platform within 50 light-years of human space has just been tagged by a quantum resonance cascade." Veltar turned to his sensor operator. "Confirm fleet status now." The younger Zephyrian's hide had gone completely white with fear. "My lord, I'm reading massive electromagnetic anomalies throughout the fleet. Communication systems are failing. Navigation is compromised. We're blind." "Impossible," Veltar roared. "Our technology is quantum shielded." Morrison's voice continued from the speakers, as if he had heard the exchange. "Your quantum shielding is exactly the problem. Our disruption field doesn't attack your systems directly. It corrupts the quantum entanglement that holds them together. The more advanced your technology, the more vulnerable it becomes." Around the command chamber, displays began flickering and failing. Warning alarms sounded as ship after ship reported system failures cascading through the Zephyrian fleet, but Martinez wasn't finished. "You have 1 hour to begin withdrawing from human space," her voice announced. "If you don't, you're going to discover what we've been building in the shadows for the past 15 years. A new image appeared on the failing display, something that made Veltar's blood run cold. It was a human ship, but like nothing in their intelligence files. Sleek, dark, and radiating an energy signature that their sensors couldn't identify. "We call them Reaper-class vessels," Martinez said. "We built 300 of them. Each one carries enough firepower to sterilize a continent." "And Commander Veltar?" The image zoomed in on the ship's hull, revealing text etched in multiple languages. The Zephyrian translation made Veltar's 4 hearts skip in rhythm. "For the children of New Haven. They're already on their way to your homeworlds." The transmission ended, leaving the Zephyrian command chamber in chaos. Emergency. Lights flickered as systems continued to fail. Communication with the fleet was sporadic at best, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, 300 human ships were moving towards Zephyrian space with the fury of a species that had been pushed too far. Sub-Commander Rixtal approached nervously. "Orders, my lord?" Veltar stared at the dark screen for a long moment, his hide cycling through colors of confusion, fear, and dawning realization. The humans hadn't spent the last 48 hours in panic or desperation. They had spent them activating systems that had been in place for years. This had been a trap, and the Zephyrian Empire had walked directly into it. "Send a priority transmission to the homeworld," Veltar ordered, his voice hollow with defeat. Tell them we may have awakened something we cannot control." But even as he gave the order, Veltar knew it was too late. In the depths of space, human ships were already beginning their approach to Zephyrian worlds. And aboard each one, the crew carried the memory of a child's scream and the fury of a species that had been grossly underestimated. The sleeping giant was awake, and it was absolutely furious. Chapter 4. The Reckoning. The First Zephyrian World. Tadai was Kethmar Prime, a garden planet home to 50 million souls in the Empire's primary agricultural research centers. The Reaper-class vessel, Righteous Fury, dropped out of quantum space at the edge of the system at exactly 0600 standard time, its dark hull reflecting no light as it began its approach. Captain Maria Santos stood on the bridge, watching the peaceful, blue-green world grow larger on the tactical display. Around her, a crew of 60 humans worked with the quiet efficiency of people who had trained for this moment their entire careers, hoping it would never come, knowing it inevitably would. "Distance to target?" Santos asked, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. 15 million kilometers and closing," replied Lieutenant Commander Patel from the navigation station. "All systems nominal. Quantum disruptors are already affecting their orbital defenses. Through the main viewer, Santos could see the Zephyrian defense platforms trying desperately to rotate toward the approaching human ship. But their targeting systems flickered and failed, corrupted by the quantum cascade that had preceded the righteous fury by several hours. "Ma'am," called out Ensign Rodriguez from communications, "we're receiving transmission attempts from the planet. Multiple frequencies. They're trying to surrender." Santos closed her eyes for a moment, seeing again the intelligence, footage from New Haven, children's bodies in the streets, families burned alive in their homes, the systematic execution of every human being on the planet, recorded and broadcast as a warning. "Are they offering to return our dead?" she asked quietly. Rodriguez listened to his earpiece for a moment. "No, ma'am, they're offering to negotiate, asking for terms." "Tell them," Santos said, opening her eyes, "that they had their chance to negotiate. It ended when they chose to target our children." The righteous fury continued its approach, passing the disabled defense platforms like a shark moving through a reef. On the planet below, 50 million Zephyrians went about their daily lives, unaware that their government's actions 18 systems away had sealed their fate. "Captain," Lieutenant Commander Patel said softly, "we're in optimal firing position." Santos looked around the bridge at her crew. These were good people. Scientists, engineers, explorers who had joined the Deep Space Service to push the boundaries of human knowledge. Now they were about to become something else entirely, the instruments of humanity's wrath. "This is for New Haven," she said simply. "Fire." The Righteous Fury's main weapon wasn't a traditional gun or missile system. It was something entirely new, a quantum singularity generator that could create controlled black holes and direct them at planetary targets. When activated, it would literally tear the planet apart from within, consuming everything in its path until nothing remained but scattered debris. But as Santos watched the weapon charge, something unexpected happened. Her communications officer looked up from his station with confusion. "Ma'am, we're receiving a transmission. Not from the planet, from Earth, Priority Alpha." On speaker, President Martinez's voice filled the bridge, carrying an authority that transcended military rank. "All Reaper vessels, this is command, stand down. Repeat, stand down and await further orders." Santos felt her heart skip. They were seconds away from firing, seconds away from avenging New Haven and sending a clear message to the Zephyrian Empire about the cost of targeting human children. "Command, this is Righteous Fury. We are in optimal firing position and ready to execute mission parameters." "Captain Santos," Martinez's voice replied, "I'm ordering all Reaper vessels to hold position but do not fire. We've received an unprecedented communication from the Zephyrian homeworld." On the tactical display, Kethmar Prime continued its peaceful rotation, unaware of how close it had come to annihilation. Santos felt her hands trembling slightly as the magnitude of the moment washed over her. "What kind of communication, Madam President?" "Complete and unconditional surrender." The bridge fell silent. After a moment, Santos found her voice. "Ma'am, could you repeat that?" "The Zephyrian Empire has agreed to complete withdrawal from human space, reparations for the New Haven massacre, and surrender of all individuals responsible for the attack. They're also offering to share advanced medical technology that could extend human lifespan by centuries." Santos stared at the planet on her screen. 50 million lives, hanging in the balance of a decision made by people who would never see the consequences of their actions. "Captain," Martinez's voice continued, "I need you to understand something. The Zephyrians didn't surrender because they're afraid of our weapons. They surrendered because they've realized what kind of species we are." "I don't understand, ma'am." "Their intelligence networks have been analyzing human history since our first contact. What they discovered terrified them more than our technology ever could. They learned that we're the only known species that has never, not once in our entire recorded history, committed complete genocide against another sapient species even when we had the capability and justification." Santos felt something shift in her chest as the implications sank in. Every other species they've encountered has a point at which they stop fighting and either surrender or commit total annihilation of their enemies. But humans? We fight to total victory and then try to rebuild our enemies into something better. We're the species that defeated Nazi Germany and then helped rebuild it. We're the species that dropped atomic bombs on Japan and then became their closest ally. On the screen, Kethmar Prime continued its rotation, its 50 million inhabitants still unaware of how close they had come to death, and how the nature of their would-be killers had ultimately saved them. The Zephyrians studied our response to the New Haven massacre, Martinez continued. They watched us build weapons capable of destroying their entire civilization. They watched us deploy those weapons, and then they realized something that no other species has ever figured out. What's that, ma'am? That the same nature that makes us incredibly dangerous also makes us incredibly merciful. We built the Reaper fleet, not because we wanted to use it, but because we hoped we'd never have to. The Zephyrians realized that a species capable of such restraint when holding ultimate power is not a species they can ever truly defeat. Santos looked around her bridge at her crew, people who had been ready to commit an act of unprecedented destruction and were now silently grateful they wouldn't have to live with the consequences. Orders, ma'am? Return to Earth, Captain, all of you. You've won the war without firing a shot. You've proven that the greatest strength isn't in the weapons we build, but in the wisdom to know when not to use them. As the righteous fury began its long journey home, Santos remained on the bridge, watching Kethmar Prime shrink in the distance. Somewhere on that world, 50 million beings would live to see another day, because humanity had chosen mercy over vengeance. But she also knew that throughout the galaxy the story of this moment would spread. The story of a species that had built the power to destroy its enemies utterly, and then chose not to use it. The sleeping giant had awakened, shown its strength, and then chosen to go back to sleep. And that choice would echo through the stars, for generations to come. Epilogue: The Long Peace. 5 years later. Dr. Sarah Okafor walked through the memorial gardens of New Eden, the rebuilt colony that now stood where New Haven once flourished. The graves were simple, white stone markers bearing names and dates, surrounded by earth flowers that somehow seemed to thrive in the alien soil. She paused at one marker in particular. Emma Chen, age 7. She dreamed of seeing Earth's oceans. The trees are coming along nicely. Okafor turned to see an unexpected visitor, High Commander Veltar, former leader of the Zephyrian invasion fleet, now serving as ambassador for interspecies relations. His scales had lost their military brightness, fading to the muted tones of age and regret. Ambassador, Okafor nodded. I didn't expect to see you here. I come every month, Veltar replied, his forearms carefully holding a small potted plant. To remember, and to plant. He knelt, an awkward gesture for his serpentine anatomy, and began digging a small hole near Emma's grave. The plant he placed was a hybrid, created in the joint human-Zephyrian agricultural labs that now operated throughout this sector of space. It will bloom blue and gold, he explained, the colors of memory and hope in both our cultures. Okafor watched the former warlord tend to the plant with surprising gentleness. Your people ask why you do this. Some do, Veltar admitted. They don't understand why I choose to carry the burden of remembering, but you humans taught us something important about the weight of power. They stood together in comfortable silence, surrounded by a garden that had become something more than a memorial. It had become a symbol of transformation. The medical exchange program is exceeding expectations, Okafor said eventually. Human children born this year may live to see 3 centuries. And Zephyrian hatchlings are learning human literature in their schools, Veltar replied. Yesterday, my youngest granddaughter asked me to explain the concept of hope, a word that didn't exist in our language before contact with your species. Okafor smiled. And what did you tell her? That hope is what allows a species to build weapons capable of destroying worlds, and then choose to build gardens instead. In the distance, the sound of children's laughter drifted across the memorial grounds. Human and Zephyrian young played together under the light of an alien sun, their games a testament to the future that had emerged from humanity's darkest hour. "Do you ever wonder," Veltar asked, "what would have happened if you had fired?" Okafor considered the question. "Every day. But I think that's the point. A species that never wonders about the cost of its choices is a species that eventually stops making good ones." As they prepared to leave the memorial garden, Veltar paused one final time at Emma's grave. "I never told you," he said quietly. "But the child whose scream you heard, the transmission that started everything, she survived." Okafor's breath caught. "What?" The broadcast was from a shelter deep underground. The child was terrified, separated from her parents but alive. My communications officer, he chose that transmission because he thought it would be most effective. He didn't know it would teach your species that even in our cruelty, we were not thorough. Where is she now? Veltar's scales shifted to a warm golden hue. Her name is Lisa Park. She's 16 now, studying xenobiology at the University of New Geneva. She says she wants to understand why different species make the choices they do. As they walked away from the memorial, the setting sun cast long shadows across the garden, but the flowers, human and Zephyrian and hybrid creations that had never existed before, continued to bloom in defiance of the darkness. Behind them, the graves stood silent, witness to a truth that would reshape galactic civilization for millennia to come. That the greatest victories are not won by those who destroy their enemies, but by those who transform them into friends. The sleeping giant had awakened, shown its power, chosen mercy, and in doing so, had awakened something far more powerful than fear in the hearts of its former enemies. It had awakened hope. End.